New Zealand, we were thinking that any chronic users of those types of drugs are likely to be going through their doctor simply because it's much cheaper. So there's a $5 copay or a $3 copay with that. As far as the actual mechanics of how this was done in the adjustment, Peter Herbison unfortunately isn't here, so he'd be able to answer that question. And I'm not a statistician, so I'm sorry. No, and that is one of the problems that we do have with the drug information that we have. We also don't have any information on drugs that are prescribed in hospital either. So that is, and there are some other limitations to the information that is recorded in the pharmaceutical collection as well.
Because it may be one of the causes of estrogen nephritis, and people on the PPIs get protection for steroids. So actually, the question is, do you attribute the estrogen nephritis to the PPI or actually to the steroids?
Yes. So we did adjust for a huge, so of the information that we had from the pharmaceutical collection, so these were people who had gone to the doctor and been dispensed with the drugs. We had a huge list of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories that are included in the New Zealand formulary, and we adjusted for each of those individually. And it was actually quite surprising that those the estimates changed actually by less than 5%. So based on the information that we had, it did not seem that that was actually confounding the association, but we don't have the over-the-counter drug information. I'm sorry.
All right. I think very quickly, because we got to move on. Sorry.
If someone was getting these other drugs on a very regular basis, they probably would have got them prescribed. I mean, I know that there will be some that's over-the-counter, but
especially as we're getting the call on inhibitors that doctor anyway, that get the ball down as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, sorry to cut the conversation short, but we're a little pressed for time. So I'd like to thank Mei Ling and welcome our next speaker. Our next speaker is Abdoulaye Agbor Yansana, originally from Sierra Leone, now here in New Zealand. And we're going to hear about national differences in time trends of tuberculosis in West Africa. Thank you. Oh, yes, here. Yes.
So,
a little bit unclear. There you go. So, just look down there. That's where you
right.
can read your...
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. So if I want to go down, I want to go up.
There
Okay.
you go. Yeah.
Okay.
This thing should actually be off. It's
This is
distracting.
off.
Sorry.
Okay. Sorry about that. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much for...
You might want to step up to the mic there.
Okay.
There you go.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much for this fantastic opportunity to talk about tuberculosis in West Africa. Now, the aim of this talk is to investigate national differences and time trends of tuberculosis in West Africa for the period 1990 to 2012. Now, it is widely believed that tuberculosis originated from Africa 70,000 years ago. Now, this slide is going to show us the interesting journey TB took from Africa to other parts of the world. There were 4 lineages originally in Africa. 2 of those lineages, as you can see on the map there, migrated to Europe, Western Europe, the Far East, the Indian subcontinent, and Southeast Asia. However, 2 ancient lineages seeded Africa, and then they migrated westwards. Now, this slide is going to show us the journey the 2 lineages that left Africa took to come back to Africa. So during colonization and conquest and international trade, some of these lineages returned back to Africa, as you can see in the map, as more efficient and highly evolved killer pathogens. So clearly, tuberculosis is a threat to global public health. In 2008, tuberculosis killed every someone at least every 15 seconds and infected a third of the world population. Now, in 2011, there were 8.7 million new cases of tuberculosis and 1.4 million deaths. And these deaths exclude people who have TB and also have HIV. Now, worldwide, men have a higher risk than women, but the burden of the disease is highest in Asia. Africa, however, has the highest incidence and mortality rates per capita. Now, I use descriptive epidemiology because this methodology helped me to generate hypotheses and to answer specific questions, such as what is the impact of TB in West Africa, and which countries have a greater disease burden and why? How does TB vary by age and gender? Now, there were lots of sources of data, and the key data points were the World Health Organization, the Global Burden of Disease Project, the World Bank, United Nations data, and various other data sources. But there was a problem with quality of data from Africa. TB data is highly imprecise, and this is due to underreporting and frequent misdiagnosis. And there is also the issue of poor access to national TB programs. And furthermore, vital registration system does not exist in West Africa. And so what that means is that most TB statistics is estimated mostly from expert opinion and from statistical models. Now, this slide shows the extent of uncertainty of the data. As you can see on those graphs, I have used Nigeria and Mauritania as examples, but this pattern you see there is consistent for all the countries in West Africa. The blue line is the best estimate of tuberculosis, and those dotted lines you see measures the extent of uncertainty of the data. Now, tuberculosis is not a problem in New Zealand, and clearly it is not a problem in Australia. And I'm convinced that TB is not a problem anywhere else in the Western world. But it is a problem in West Africa. As you can see, there are 395,000 new TB cases and 617,000 existing cases reported to the World Health Organization in 2012. And in the same year, there were 61,000 deaths from tuberculosis alone. And these exclude death from TB, HIV. Now, the burden of tuberculosis is not equally distributed in West Africa. As you can see again on that graph, TB incidence in 2012, some countries show very high TB incidence, like Sierra Leone and Mauritania, for instance. And down the line, you can see Burkina Faso and Mali showing very good statistics. And that pattern you see there is similar for TB prevalence for 2012. Again, Sierra Leone with a very high TB prevalence for 2012, and again, Burkina Faso and Ghana, very low TB prevalence. Mortality statistics is similar. Once again, Sierra Leone and Mauritania, very high, and Burkina Faso and Ghana, very low. Now, I also investigated TB mortality by gender, and clearly, the pattern for West Africa is similar with the global pattern. You can see there are more men in West Africa dying from tuberculosis than women. But in Nigeria, as you can see on the graph, more women are dying from tuberculosis than men. And possible explanations could be that Nigerian men simply don't take part in the national TB program. Or it is also possible to say that Nigerian women have poor access to TB control programs in West Africa than other women elsewhere in the region. Now, when I looked at TB incidents for the last 22 years, you can see the pattern of TB incidents between 1990 to 2012 that for West African region is quite similar. However, Sierra Leone is the main regional outlier. But again, if you look closely, you will notice that the Gambia, Mauritania, and Liberia, they are continuously showing a rising trend of tuberculosis incidence. And that picture you see there is similar for TB prevalence. Again, Sierra Leone, the main regional outlier, and Liberia, the Gambia, and Mauritania showing an increasing trend. And that is true for TB mortality. So when we look at that result, and taking all that result into consideration, clearly we can see that tuberculosis is a serious public health problem in West Africa. And the impact is greatest in countries with weak healthcare systems. And that means many countries in the region will not meet the Millennium Development Goals. And clearly, it is likely that West African region tuberculosis problem will remain a significant health problem beyond 2050. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thanks very much, Janssen. Questions, comments? Linda, on the inside.
Thank you for your presentation. Really important and interesting. In your graph of gender by rates by gender in different countries, yeah, that one. In Liberia, the male rate is just much, much higher than all of the other rates. Did you have any thoughts of the reason or explanation?
Yeah, as I pointed out earlier, the similarity with the trend globally is that more men are sort of dying from TB than women. And in Liberia, as you pointed out, there is a higher rate of men dying from TB than men. And one possible explanation would be Liberia, and again with the sister country in Sierra Leone, as you can see there, these countries have just gone through very traumatic periods. And Liberia in particular had a sort of protracted war that lasted for 14 years. And that perhaps might explain why we have more trend of TB cases among Liberian men. And again, once again, we need to remember when wars break out in countries, the vast majority of warring groups are mostly men. And it is possible that that might explain why we have more deaths among men who were mostly encamped in warring groups, if you like, in villages and so on. I mean, again, it's very difficult to explain because I actually did not go to Liberia to get this data. I actually relied on the World Health Organization, based on the data they submitted to the World Health Organization to come up with those graphs. So that is the best explanation I have for that question. Yeah.
Other questions or comments? Well, join me in thanking Janssen.
Yeah.